In June 2021, 23 people are selected to join the first Australian citizens jury on genome editing. Over 3 days, they will learn how we can edit human genes. They will deliberate on potential applications and decide how they think this technology should be used.
The whole point of having what they call a deliberative process is it's a different way to do democracy. You're not representatives like the members of parliament are, but you are representative of your general community.
Hello, my name's Tasnia. I'm 19 years old and I'm from Sydney. I think when I think about genome editing, I definitely think about Frankenstein, the playing God and etc. Obviously that's somewhat extreme, but obviously we think of things in polarities when we don't know all of the details of it. So it's pretty intimidating and pretty scary to me, but exciting at the same time.
Keeping an open mind is important, and changing your mind is actually a very powerful deliberative act. It is a space where you're not arguing, you're trying to learn from each other.
So my name is Thomas Kim. I live in Sydney, and I'm 37 years old, because I'm hearing more things around the CRISPR and people getting stem cell transplants and things like that, which is, we are moving into that direction of, what we call a gene editing or changing the fundamental base of human health. So do I know anything about it? I have no idea what I'm talking about, but am I concerned? Yes, I am.
This is the first time that really, in this particular sort of complex scientific manner, that the views of citizens are going to be taken into account.
My name is Darya. I'm 38 years old. I come from Sydney and originally I'm from Turkey. To be honest, when I first received the email, it was a shock for me. I thought it was sent to someone else. Why would they ask me to, tell about my opinions about this kind of a question? I'm not even a scientist. Usually where I come from, politicians and scientists, everything they decide for you. So there is not much asking to the citizens.
You're a group of citizens who aren't following a particular vested interest in the issue. You're coming here as curious, open-minded citizens.
My name's Ernie Symes. I'm 60 years old and I come from Bribie Island in Queensland. Like a grade 10 dropout, I went to repeat. The teachers wanted me to because I was a thug. Well, my concerns is it's not about giving it to us, it's about giving it to my grandchildren to change their DNA when they have their children. So that's what my only worry is, that unfortunately, my worry is that I'm dead and gone, and I can't have a say, but now is the ideal time now to have a say.
And so what you will be making recommendations on is this particular question: under what circumstances and conditions might the application of human genome editing technology be acceptable? It's going to be a big day of a lot of information, but you will be supported and you will have breaks and there'll be times to sit and reflect as well.
I'm Rhonda Kersinger. I'm 70 years old and I live in Ballina, which is northern New South Wales. I feel very privileged, definitely. I think it's a wonderful way of conducting things. I guess it's also quite scary because what I think and say kind of counts now. Usually it doesn't. It's great for a bunch of scientists to go off in a lab and do what they're doing and come up with all these theories. But it's really is important for the public to have their thoughts on the matter and think about it.
So you will be having discussions at your table. You will have a facilitator there who's going to keep you on track. So it's all about what you need so that you can participate as fully as possible. It's about knowing that people are going to see the world differently, but what we can do is to listen with curiosity, listen with interest.
So I'm a biologist. I've worked in biology all my life, really. Society does some things to help people who are suffering from diseases. I think we can do more with CRISPR. And I think that's the really important thing.
Now, what you may not know, even though we inherit one copy from each parent, then we get also these 60 to 70 changes which neither of the parents have. So where they come from? They are the errors which happen in a sperm or an egg. We call them de novo, and we have them.
And that's what's happened with gene editing as well. Right from the start of the development of CRISPR technology in 2013, the scientists themselves have been talking about the ethical, legal, and social implications.
We're trying to stop things from happening because we have fear, right? We're scared of something might go wrong. Of course, something might go wrong, right? But in the same sense, we want to talk about, is it going to also at the same time minimize the suffering? I have a very mixed opinion about this depending on how I identify myself. If I put a hat on and consider this from a parent perspective, what would that mean for my kids? And then I take a step back and look at it from I'm a part of a society now. And if this is going to go for the whole mass population, I have a completely different opinion about that, right? If everyone gets genome editing done, I thought I was the only going to be the superhero, but now everyone's going to be one, then what's the point in that, right?
So, it's not, there's no black and white answer to this, is there?
There isn't. So what do we ask Diane? That's the hard one. How do we ask her as a legal expert?
What the last conversation showed us is that there's a difference between ethical acceptability and scientific acceptability. So we need to find common ground and consensus in defining that before moving on.
We never learned about this. We never talked about this. The second I heard the word genome, I didn't even know it was about genes. I thought it was a different word. I had to Google what is genome. Genes, okay. Then I understood what it was. And I'm a bachelor graduate. I'm not someone from the village who never go to primary school. That would be understandable, but I studied bachelor's. I should have known this, but I don't.
You're also forgetting that when you edit genomes to like a standard, then that standard normalizes and homogenizes what the ideal human would be like. And if you think about people of different abilities, look at Elon Musk, I think he has Asperger's, right? Yeah, he's so talented, he's so creative. And if you are going to edit, like genes, data, and etc. for one ideal, then you get rid of all of that diversity. Prior to 2017, I actually wore a hijab and I was completely, I think the way that I perceived beauty was very, very different, and the way that society imposed ideals of beauty on me was also very different. And obviously in that interim period, there was always wanting to, feel like you belonged, wanting to fit in, etc. And I'm curious because what does fitting in look like when dynamics like gene editing come into play? Does it really mean changing who you are and how you're fundamentally made? Because if so, that's pretty terrifying to me.
There hasn't been much put out there in the media. People aren't really aware of it. I think that's a starting point to me, is by just communicating to the public about what it is and getting people's views, but getting the public thinking about genome editing.
You've all heard the saying, I wouldn't change my child for a thing. He's in a wheelchair, he's blubbering away, you've got to wipe his bottom. Those parents wouldn't change their child once it's born. But in reality, in private, they probably might have a little cry and think, it's overwhelming me. I've known people like that.
Even though the parents, of a disabled child would say they wouldn't change it, because they love their child and who they are, I think that we can separate the person from the disability. And I think if we removed the disability, there'd still be an amazing son, daughter, person.
I think that's the whole notion around potential, right? Are we actually giving this child a destiny? Or are we just giving a potential that could manifest or may not.
You are not your genes. Your genes contribute to who you are, but you are not you because of your genes. Yeah.
So if that's, I think that's the consensus that I think we, or community has to come to an agreement before we can make a certain regulation.
There is always going to be some fear of the unknown, which things can go wrong. But definitely there's more positives than negatives there. I do like to agree to things. I'm a positive person, but I'm not going to just follow the crowd. I do make my own decisions, really.
I don't know, I feel maybe it's a necessary adaptation that we have to make to survive. For me, it's kind of an issue of how do we not abuse the power and how do we work to make sure it's fruitful and encourages human discourse and more culture.
That's the trade-off that they've got to work out, is this is going to be really significant to a small number of people. And you can't help but get into considerations of economics. So, it sounds really harsh to put economic values on these things, but that's what governments do. So one of the things that I do quite a bit of work on is this concept of trust and trustworthiness, because, people can't make every decision about everything. Who do you trust to make that decision for you?
Rely on governments or doctors or this or that, or a common cause to say, but it's for the greater good. It's like, well, not everyone agrees to it. There could be ethical,
That's why there has to be
religious consensus on that, saying, woo, that's not wrong, that's not God's plan, or all that sort of stuff.
If I could add on, I wanted to say that I think earlier it was mentioned that a lot of people said that it's about, empathy and understanding, and the only way that we can, escape this predicament of natural selection or a superhuman in that regard is if we focus on empowering each individual, so having a very customer or individual-centric perspective.
If this person survives, how much are they going to cost the healthcare system over their life? And this drug might cost $800,000, but they might cost the healthcare system millions of dollars. So it's that sort of cold, hard economic trade-off, but that's the thing that governments sort of have to do.
I think someone else earlier mentioned the greater good as well, and I feel like, especially living in a Western society, a principle that I was personally raised with, I'm pretty sure all of us, has been meritocracy. We all want to feel that we're working hard for what we get and what we deserve in life, but for people who can undergo genome editing and etc., obviously they're advantaged from that regard. So how do we equalise the playing field?
This is a whole different world. This is changing of humanity. This is accelerated evolution.
Well done, everyone. You've hung in incredibly well. That's been a lot of information to absorb. I think the process is going exceptionally well. We've got a really interesting and diverse group of participants who are from all around Australia. We've also got really interesting speakers. The participants are hearing from experts not only in the actual mechanics of it, but in terms of what the ethical issues are, because in a way what their remit is for this jury is under what circumstances and conditions is human genome editing acceptable. Good morning, everyone. So I'd like to have a little bit of a check-in with how you all are. Yesterday was an exceedingly full day, and we really understand if that's been a lot to absorb.
This started becoming very exciting, and the more I learn about it, the more I want to suck all the info about all these speakers.
Yesterday was great. I really enjoyed the presentations. It posed just more questions than answers.
Yeah, I want to learn more. We'll see how we go today.
I appreciate that all the expert witnesses were able to put it in a way that I could understand.
It's been fantastic. I'm hoping it's going to develop a little bit more.
Walked here this morning and I'm looking forward to an exciting day with more information.
As someone who has a disability, what's your personal view on all of this and whether there's a general consensus about this topic from the community?
The really difficult question that comes up is whether disability even if it entails suffering, actually contributes positively to our lives in some way. There are some conditions which are incompatible with human dignity. Maybe fewer than we currently think, but there are some. And then it's the right thing is to ensure that people don't have to live with those conditions.
Now it's over to you and your facilitators.
If I could also add on, I thought it was interesting how they mentioned that the focal point was parental choice as opposed to the state, or like, you know, being a productive member of society, working capacity, etc. But also that raises questions on like whether all parents are capable of, you know, providing for the best interest of their child. What if, you know, later in this child's life they'll be an adult and they'll realize I didn't actually want this to be done, or alternatively they'll realize I wish my parents had put me through this process.
If there was this technology used on an embryo, is that something that you'd have to think in the future, that these new children could be suing their parents for genome editing?
How far are we at in actually making this happening? Like, is there even an effort to developing, or is there a research happening? Is there a... I mean, clearly, from my personal perspective, you know, I would rather not have these children suffering.
We who work in this kind of world talk a lot about the need for public engagement and public debate. Sometimes we're not very good at actually achieving that. And this is one of the best ways I know of ensuring not just that the people who've been part of the consultation or part of the citizens' jury feel better informed and better empowered, but they go away and talk to their families and their communities and others and encourage them to get involved in contributing to these sorts of decisions, which really do need to be societal level decisions and not necessarily scientific or political ones.
In my case, because I've got mental health problems as well, I tried passive suicide, which means for 6 months I didn't take insulin at all. So I'm up in the 28s instead of down in the 3.8s. So that's a big factor in it, that I know other people that got diabetes and had been in a similar situation. So it's very complex where they say, okay, we've got to treat this. Now this young speaker here just said, once you treat one thing, then we've got to treat another. We looked at the engine, and he's exactly right.
How do you choose which one you're going to start with, and what's the criteria for that?
I think that's a really good one. We'll come to Ernie, because I think you could almost combine those two, which is where do you start? Where do you start, and what sort of research is already underway? Where do we start? Where are we at?
I think it's been a pretty unexpectedly emotional few days. I think when I first walked into it, I expected a lot of like research, consultation, but I didn't realize that a lot of the questions and conversations have so much moral weight behind them. And I feel like so many of my perspectives are already becoming more nuanced, and I'm really glad. But also I didn't expect it to be so confronting. I can't even imagine what that debate would be like. We've been here for 2 days and are so overwhelmed.
I think we're sort of just responsible for making somewhat the decision for the majority of Australia, because that's why they've sort of pulled us from everywhere. It's sort of, you can't.
It's brought up some emotions when they talk about disabilities, and it's brought up some raw memories and things that I've gone through. So what's happened, all this stuff, history of that, and what these people are trying to, these researchers and scientists, etc., touching base with the community to see if they're on track. So what it's done, it's brought forward my journey. These events are very powerful.
So yeah, we could enhance physical traits, like say height. Lots of studies show that being tall when you're a child, especially if you're a boy, is really actually linked to your well-being. People who are taller tend to report to be happier. So you might think, oh well, let's make, you know, everyone taller. But I think that's a silly thing to do for numerous reasons.
I love human variation. Our strength is our human variation, but treating a few people for a disease, it's not going to have a measurable impact on human variation. And probably the other question of will this technology be accessible it probably won't.
That's completely true. If a few people do it, it's not going to make a big difference. But one of the things we want to think about with these technologies, well, what if everyone could do it? What if everyone could do it? What if it is accessible? And some approaches to ethics think, well, if you can't will it that everyone can do it, that everyone could do it, then you shouldn't do it either. You can start to do that with genetic selection now. It's less powerful, but you could, test embryos for their predisposition to schizophrenia and to autism and to dyslexia. It's like that. I'm very against those types of uses I've sort of written about it for the reasons I talked about cognitive diversity.
Could we make people happier? There's drugs do it. I'm actually have always been a happy person, and I've known it. I now know it's because I'm tall. I never realised that was the reason. And I've also...
Like I said, I might be a bit religious, I don't push it on anyone, but is it changing? Is it going against the Ten Commandments? He's given us this ability to make these decisions, otherwise we won't be here today. So you really can't bring the God equation into it because we're here. That's what I think.
Look, to be honest, I have different views. I like playing the devil's advocate and putting something different on the table. I can give you the point of view from an Islamic side where the Islamic book says that it is okay as long as it is curing something, not done, because out of curiosity or you just want to do it. So scholars are okay with that.
Be able to discern fact from fiction and risk from potential, and that's proving to be a challenge. I'm not sure that critical thinking and fact is winning.
In my view, actually hearing the voices of, we call them ordinary people, but they're not ordinary people, they're all extraordinary, and everybody brings their own extraordinary life story and reflections and so on. It's just great to hear their views on all of this and to see them, just engage with things that are really complex but ask really, really deep and sensible questions. That's what gets me on a high. So then let's get back to the remit, what we hoped we wanted to get to. Under what circumstances might applications of human genome editing technology be acceptable to society, specifically because we're focusing on Australia here, to Australian society? There are some things that you need to think about when you're making your recommendations. Heritable human genome editing is not permitted in Australia. There's this law that says you could be in prison for 15 years if you do it, nor is it in many other countries. Is that a place that we want to stay with, or do we think, Parliament should be looking at changing this?
Good morning, everybody. We've got what can only be described as quite a lot of work to do in a fairly short amount of time. So I'm going to suggest you get started now on a recommendation on heritable human genome editing, which currently is illegal in Australia.
Because in practicality, sometimes there are a panel of experts, but no one is accountable for making the decision.
Is that part of the transparency, that you want to see transparency of who makes the decision? Because we can add that as a condition. Any more on the conditions?
Yeah, if I could suggest, I guess, greater focus on research and development with key stakeholders, including people who suffer from whatever heritable genome illness or disease there is.
To me, research purposes only, under clearly prescribed circumstances or defined circumstances to me.
Or do we have majority view on that? Just hold off on the conditions. Read the first half of it again. Okay.
Wouldn't that be a condition?
So we'll come into the condition and we'll just... No, but that's good. No, it's very important because sometimes I think I can't quite... Let's write that down as is, the first half. The recommendation is to permit for research purposes...
It's just more in general, enhancement's not essential, and so it should only be for the people who really would like it and they've decided themselves to do it, so we don't want them being too young.
As Reese was saying, not all of his friends at 25 would be like capable of making it.
Look, I mean, maybe there's a process, like they have to have a recommendation letter from a psychologist or from a physician. Like, it's not just about going shopping.
Do you want to have that as some kind of condition, with some kind of...
It's a bit hard for us to figure out.
That's important.
Is that liability? Yeah, so I don't know what it means.
They're talking about research that would illuminate the implications of...
I think this is kind of saying that we really want to focus the efforts towards HHG on suffering and life threatening. So it's a direction for them.
It's been a roller coaster of emotions for me. These events, I mean, they're absolutely fantastic to watch, and you feel elated every time you're involved in one of these events.
You're actually diminishing people's beliefs. That would be my concern with a statement like that.
I think that comes back to there being no one authority.
Yeah, but I mean, but we know that it's like a lawyers. They self-regulate themselves, and like bankers.
Yeah.
It hasn't worked. And they've had royal commissions.
We can do it. Have this done
These
by
are
quarter 11.
by an authorising body.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
I still
I
think
can-
these are conditions.
This is
It's
way
coming
too
under
slow.
purple.
Yeah.
We can't type down things. We need a summary right from the get-go here.
If we pause, I mean, I don't know if it's going to take longer.
We have to have this done in a quarter of an hour.
Okay.
Which is
So what is
actually
green?
impossible.
You're just going to have to identify. It's really going to be
I mean, you
hard.
could put things...
These citizens have had a chance to sort out the issue, sort the wheat from the chaff, if you like, in terms of this is what's really important, this is what's really going on. And this is a very complex issue, more complex than most that I've been involved in. And that's always really challenging, that we can go through a process and come up with something which is meaningful and makes sense to the participants, but then also to any decision maker who can use the material. And we do have some follow-up work to do to translate that for decision makers.
So welcome to the culminating day and moment of this citizens' jury looking at human genome editing. We have a jury presentation to give. I'd like to honour the members of the jury here who've done this most amazing job this morning, particularly in drawing together some recommendations which include some concerns and conditions and, you know, a few caveats, as much as they could in a very short amount of time. So I'd like to introduce now Eliza and Stephen, two of our jurors, who are going to present the jury's findings and recommendations.
As a preamble, we are 23 randomly selected Australians who have met over the past 4 days here in Canberra at this delightful museum of Australian democracy, the old Parliament House, to learn and deliberate about human genome editing technology.
So our recommendations are grouped under the following main headings. Firstly, we have heritable human genome editing, then genetic research involving human embryos, we have non-heritable human genome editing, other recommendations, as well as mitochondrial donation. Our principles are the public good, cultural and ethical considerations, equity of access, appropriate regulations, safety and efficacy, and support for ongoing research.
Or for heritable human genome editing, there's a strong but non-consensual view that this technology be approved for treatments only after further research and with strict guidelines and government regulations.
One misconception about these processes is that there is one consensus that emerges. That's not the case. There's often a convergence because we often agree more than we realise, but that diversity is really useful and that it needs to be understood and harnessed.
So in regard to non-heritable human genome editing, we did agree as a group that this should be supported in Australia, although there are some differences regarding the specifics, but we do all support the use of non-heritable human genome editing for therapeutic purposes, as opposed to for enhancement purposes. We also noted that there should be a national and a global standard of which this is compared. So we also did come up with some general recommendations. Firstly, that the purpose of the human genome editing should always be to alleviate human suffering.
We also agreed that any application should be confirmed and informed by adequate research. There should always be safeguards for privacy and confidentiality. There should be a national register of genome. It's been a really great weekend for us, for all of the jury. It was really great to hear from such a diverse group of people and to hear all the different expert witnesses, and then today to finally be able to put that all together and consider our own opinions and where we'd like this to go forward.
I'm extremely impressed by what we've just heard. What you've done over these few days, very few days, is come to grips with issues of really fundamental importance, and ones where I think we really want the whole of our community to understand, engage with, and over time come on board with whatever our society decides is the right approach. So it's not about what we can do, it's about what we should do and what is ultimately for the greater good, for the individuals who are immediately affected, and then for our community as a whole, and you could even say for our species.
I think it would be helpful to have more of these sort of things to help us work out what indeed is a major therapeutic advance or what is a significant disability, to help draw the line between those sort of areas.
It's actually fairly rare for lawmakers to hear from a group of citizens that don't have a vested interest in where a lot of these regulations and things are going to go. So from that perspective, I think this has been a fantastic exercise, and that we have something documented from a group of people that don't necessarily have a very clear or attached interest to what's been spoken about. So thank you for that.
It's just been incredible to me to see our initial vague ideas develop into something that's so tangible and real. And the contribution that you've all made has just been fantastic.
There's so much that I've just learnt the past few days. It's honestly been somewhat overwhelming, but not necessarily in a bad way. I think I've come out of the experience empowered by a lot of knowledge. Yeah, I feel like I'm an informed citizen.
Quite a mind-blowing experience, in my opinion, and very humbling. Almost it was a self-discovering in some sense as well, because I walked in with a certain mindset or belief on this topic, and then every single expert going through their lifetime research on these issues and presenting their findings, and then you realize, wow, I had no idea what this was, and I was making very uninformed decision on a lot of things, and I was, in a sense, was biased towards certain ethical side of things as well. So
now I have so much more to think about, and I kind of feel very responsible about this. Now that I have all this knowledge, what am I gonna do with this? Who am I gonna give this to? And it is very important how you give this to other people.
But just the whole jury process and getting 23 people that are from so many different walks of life together to think about the same thing and come up with some conclusions about it was pretty amazing. And we're all still friends.
The only thing I want to do is maybe I'll write a little bit down in a couple of photos just to prove to me grandchildren when they're old enough, yeah, Poppy did help a bit, so they'll be proud. And I'm very proud of you guys. I just feel like crying right now. I'm very proud of the production crew, all the scientists, all the jury. It is a milestone in my life, not only to be listened to, but to be able to be informed and educated. Thank you.